iDS Talks is a podcast dedicated to helping corporations and law firms find new and effective ways to leverage data, giving them a decisive advantage both in and out of the courtroom.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of iDS Talks. My name is Jonathan Sachs, Chief Revenue Officer at iDS, and I'm joined by Tim LaTulippe, one of our directors out of iDS's London office. We're here today to talk about version 9.0 of his D3, which is Delightfully Digestible Data email. He covers 3 topics in this late spring edition. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Jonathan. Pleasure to be with you.
As always. This is not our first. Always. Yes, this is not our first rodeo.
I left you hanging.
Yeah. Yeah. Make that reference to rodeo, and here we are talking about our London office. Probably not too many rodeos going over there in jolly old England, are there?
No, but a couple of horses did bolt the other day, which made national news. Yeah, I cycled through there. I actually saw a little bit of the aftermath of that. I felt really terrible for the horses. Obviously, they're terrified, but yeah. I don't know if that happens at a regular rodeo, but it seemed relevant.
The horses do run around, but they're in a contained area, not the streets of London. I half expected you to tell us that you hopped on your bike and decided you would attempt to chase them down with your lasso that you have.
Yeah. Thinking stunts from like a 1930s film. Yeah, absolutely.
Would have been perfect. Yeah. Instead, though, we're going to talk about D3 or D3 email. Now, for our listeners who are not familiar with it, Tim sends out this email, his D3 email, to a curated list of individuals. And we're always looking to expand that list to those who'd be interested. This is not a spammy type of email. It really is kind of what is top of mind, what you've observed and what's been going on at iDS, both in the current, perhaps, month, as well as a look forward. So let's just jump into version 9, and we'll keep the listeners waiting to find out how they can get added to this delightful email. And I teed it up by saying that there were 3 topics in particular that you discussed. And the first one of that would be the team growth. So what can you share about that?
Yeah, happy to. So the first kind of bite, if you like, is a bit of news around our team growth. It's not just here in the UK, in Europe. Selfishly, I will focus on that more than most things. But we've added some top talent in the US. We added a team member on the business development side. On your side of the pond, Jonathan, we've brought in a new director over discovery services, bolster our e-discovery team massively. But over here, notably, we've hired a gentleman by the name of Fabrice, who is a huge add to our team. He's not only a cultural fit, he fits with the team very well. You do have to be a little bit cool to work here, so that's kind of factor number 1. But number 2, he's worked in tangential and kind of related industries around Europe. He's multilingual, which is hugely important for European consulting and growth. And he's just really hit the ground running in a lot of ways. He's woven in really nicely, and we're very happy to have him. So yeah, that's the news on that front.
Yeah, very exciting when we get to add to our business development team, and we're very excited that Drew Gabler joined us as that director of client services, or discovery services, I should say. I'd like to think that when you said you have to be kind of cool to work here, that would include me, but I'm afraid if I had said that, you'd make note that I was here before you, therefore the cool factor started after me. So we're not going to touch on that. We're going to let this one lie. But you did talk about about Fabrice Locoso and his multicultural and his multilingual capabilities. And so I think that fits nicely in with the second point that you discussed in version 9.0 of D3, which is an increased multi-jurisdiction type of engagements that we're seeing here at iDS. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we've always been a fairly pan-European operation over here. We're based in London, which is a great place to be for a lot of reasons. But it's also it becomes a bit of a flywheel for us, if you like, in the rest of Europe. It doesn't mean we don't have ambitions to be elsewhere in Europe, but we do service a lot of the wider continent from here. And then over the last quarter, which I can't believe is already well past, we increased the number of countries within Europe where we're doing consulting work, where we're providing discovery services around investigations. That tends to be the largest, I should say, proportion of work that we do in that part of Europe. They're a little less disputes driven, unless they're dragged into something in our courts in England or Ireland or the US that have a similar kind of common law jurisdiction thing going on. Otherwise, they're dealing with regulatory type scrutiny and investigations, which we're very good at dealing with. When you're working on these cases, it's not good enough to say I have the technology and I've done this before. Those are two great starting points, but it's even more important to say I know how it works in your country. I'm not an expert on your laws, but I do speak your language, whether it's a technical to a technical person, or if it's a French francophone environment. Can we speak French with their IT team? This kind of thing. So that's very important, and it adds a lot of success and fluidity to our work.
Yeah, you mentioned the element about understanding the laws, and so our listeners are clear, right? iDS does not dispense legal advice. We're not a legal practicing firm, but there are certainly laws that are in play in these different jurisdictions, particularly with respect to data privacy or privacy, as Tim would say, and other types of protections. And so I think your point is, and it's a very, very important one, that working with an organization that understands that these laws are in effect, they are in play, they do need to be complied with, does differentiate us from others. Now, you may have hit on this one, but the one that struck me early on was the element of culture as well. And so can you just expand on that a little bit for us? Because I think it's something that particularly our U.S. listeners may not be as aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't mean to say it in sort of a hand-wavy fashion, so I'm glad you brought me up on it. It's something that's worth explaining. And it's that, I mean, quite bluntly, cultures vary in close geography. Even you can hop from country to country in the space of a 1 hour plane ride, and things are quite a bit different. Not just language and law, but culture overall. So there might be a strong reticence towards providing information to other people, even if it seems, even if it isn't adversarial, it seems fairly normal. You get a lot of understandable pushback, and sometimes it's under the guise of a data protection law or something, or in other times it's just it's purely a discomfort with the whole process, and you have to have some awareness of that to engage with it. Usually, in a lot of cases, it's a painful journey dealing with these kinds of things. No one walks away from one of these large cases and says, that was a whole lot of fun, I'd like to do that again.
Sure.
So there are going to be paper cuts along the way, but if you understand how, if you can talk to your client base and advise them of the trains that are coming, when they do pull into the station, they sort of appreciate the heads up. So if you say, well, I understand you might not want to release these documents from your grip. The Department of Justice in the United States has requested these. Request is kind of a generous term. So you are obligated to provide that information at some point. Again, we don't provide them the legal advices on these things, but being aware of the fact that they're not comfortable with it is actually very important, and we take it very seriously. So that's, I think, worth noting.
Yeah, no, that's why I brought it up. But you're right. One of the things that I think our European listeners are very aware of is how easy it is to get from one country to the next. You referenced an hour plane ride. For our U.S. listeners, it takes Tim less time to go from London to Paris than it does for me to go from New Jersey to Washington, D.C. And it can be very, it's not just culture that could be different. It's not just law, it can be different. As he said, it could be language that is different, which is why, for the record, I am fully ready on my next trip over across the pond to have Tim and Fabrice talk in French around me and me having no clue what they're saying. So more on that when we come to version 10.0 of D3. We have been talking about geographies and travel, and Tim, I think that's a great transition to the third topic that you raised in your D3 email, which is, first quarter, wow, a lot of traveling, a lot of speaking for this team. And so let's transition from our multi-jurisdiction engagements to our cross-jurisdiction, multi-jurisdiction travel and speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of it happens here in good old England, London. We get invited to speak at events. We host them. We'll be doing more of that in the spring and summer. But in the first quarter, the team spent quite a bit of time in Brussels, which is an important place for us. As a Central European government is based there. This is your Washington D.C. of the European Union, if you like. It's where central government is. And it's a home to a lot of the law firms who derive their work from investigations and things that arise from that part of the world. Dan Ruprecht, partner here in the firm, friend of mine, brother in arms in a lot of ways. He goes over there regularly. He lived there for a long time with his family. So his connections there are incredible. But we've been there a lot, even since December. I think we've collectively been 3 or 4 times, and half of those were speaking. Most recently and most impressively, Dan went over with Fabrice, and they were invited to the European Commission, which is like being invited to the DOJ to speak to their entire antitrust team, their investigations team, and they don't invite people in generally. And it's quite a privilege for us to even be in the room. So I have to be slightly candid with it. We don't want to be shouting about exact topic points and who was there and all of that. But the fact that we were allowed there and that Dan was able to deliver a lecture and answer questions back and forth was really, really quite incredible. So yeah, we made a little bit of noise about our presence there and doing that. Regulators are not. It's probably worth noting, regulators generally aren't buyers of ours. They don't work with our firm. They just wouldn't. One, because they have an enormous internal capability that's well funded and it's their own thing. But two, it does create a conflict issue with clients. You don't really want to do that. A little less so maybe in Europe, maybe, but certainly in the US, you would know. I mean, you don't want to work with the SEC as a client, probably necessarily. So. But it's really interesting that they're interested in knowing what we're doing as we are interested in what they're doing. So it's I'm sure you'll talk to Dan about it. Maybe you'll do a little podcast and get some takeaways from it. Actually, that's probably a thing that's going to happen. But it sounded like, without spoiling it for that content, it sounds like they were quite interested in what the private sector are doing. Just as interested in we are, we're sort of black boxes to each other. You've got these interactions, these exchanges of information, these requests for information and data, but no one ever sort of peeks under the blanket and says, well, what is it you're doing? Do you use relativity? How do you guys do this? Like, it's a bit opaque. So I think having that dialogue is only a good thing. But yeah, there was that. And I know, there was another event earlier in the year where our team spoke. I think it was at the Concurrence event, which was also around the competition and antitrust space, unsurprisingly. But they also had a huge array of regulatory heads from around Europe, other heavy hitters. So we've been around and speaking to just a wonderful caliber of people in the first quarter. I attended an event in Dublin with Dom in, I guess that was March, which was the international employment lawyer. I've written about it or spoken about it a little bit. We didn't actually speak there this time. They're a wonderful organization. I would speak there again. But they also had a very heavily European attendance base, which is really, really good, because typically these, I don't say typically, but sometimes events tend to have a lot of people from the US come as like a form of vacation or something. And then you get a few European people there. And that's not as helpful for us intra-Europe with our own dialogue and growth. So if you have more of the European contingent, it spurs new relationships and ideas. And I think it was great.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
No, I am impressed by just how much ground you covered, how many events that you either were invited to speak at or attended. And the U is the collective U, our London team. But very impressive. I know that we've got a busy travel schedule and speaking schedule going into the remainder of spring and summer. I'm sure it'll be a topic of version 10.0 or 11.0. Maybe I can make myself part of 10.0 if I play my cards right. But that's the teaser. It's the teaser for the next, perhaps the next D3 podcast. Let's not give too much away. Well, listen, Tim, as always, thank you for joining me on the iDS Talks podcasts. I always enjoy getting a chance to talk with you. I'd like to thank our regular subscribers and those that may be first-time listeners for spending time with us today. If you are not yet a subscriber, please hit the subscribe button. Join us on all of our podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about IDS or you want to subscribe in the manner I just talked about, go to our iDS Talks podcast website, which is on actually the idsinc.com website, or you can go wherever you normally go to get your podcasts from. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to talking more about data with you on our next edition of iDS Talks.